Time for another rant. And I'm also, as always, still getting used to DLive, which I'm not very familiar with. But that's why I got to do these rants. So today is going to be on behavior. You can probably guess from the verse I got up there. Because there's just a level of, I guess you can only say madness and evil that I don't think the world has ever seen since at least the flood. It was pretty bad before that. And the thing that I see is that many people think it's okay to hate and abuse people just because they disagree. So they don't see the irony, they don't see the hypocrisy of doing exactly what they're faulting other people for doing. There was someone I saw a quote of the other day saying that if you're not in a protected group, whatever somebody deems protected group, then it's okay to abuse you. It's okay to do the things we say that unprotected group shouldn't do. And I'm guessing that, in the future, if anybody remembers this generation, it will be the great hypocrisy or the great denial, because it's hypocrisy is what it is. And they play the victim when they get consequences or pushback on their actions. That's why this is about consequences. As you can see, the little domino image there is actually pretty big. I laid out this template originally for just doing recordings where I'm comparing two texts, but it'll just have to do for now for DLive, which again I don't use a lot because I'm mainly on YouTube and it takes a lot of time to prepare presentations and I don't see the point of doing them twice. So I just use this one now to keep in practice and to do little rants and things. Because there's hardly anybody that watches anyway. You have to be subscribed to see it, so there's not much point in advertising the link if I knew exactly where it was. Because it is only for people who are subscribed. Nice to see you, Michael B. Good to see you here. So I'm going to get right into my little rant here on behavior and hypocrisy and kind of little bits of branching off. So first up, we got Proverbs 18:1 and 2. An unfriendly person pursues selfish ends and against all sound judgment starts quarrels. Fools find no pleasure in understanding but delight in airing their own opinions. Starting the fights is the problem. There's nothing against defending yourself once a fight starts if you're the target, or if someone else is the target and you're coming to their defense. That's the key word, is defense. And so Christians shouldn't be going around starting fights, provoking people. That's why free speech does not include yelling fire in a crowded theater unless there's an actual fire, because people can get injured or killed by the stampede. So it isn't a joke, it isn't funny, and though you might not have physically tried to push the people out the door, you incited them to do so, and that's why it's wrong and why it's not covered by free speech. So this proverb here is advising people not to be stupid and start fights. But again, that doesn't mean we can't finish them. It doesn't mean we can't defend ourselves. People will cherry pick, turn the other cheek into being a doormat or a punching bag for anybody who comes along, but that isn't what it means in context either. And a lot of people do, like it says here in verse 2, just want to voice their opinions and aren't interested in hearing yours. So just don't be that person. Okay, and then again in Proverbs 18, verses 6 through 8, the lips of fools bring them strife and their mouths invite a beating. Don't be that person. There are a lot of people like that who just ask for it. They just ask for it. Now, voicing your opinion on a topic is not asking for it. Some people take it that way. They're perpetually offended by everything that you say or do that they personally don't like. So that's the other extreme. But the thing is that a foolish person just asks for it by provoking people or whatever it is. And then down to verse 8, the words of a gossip are like choice morsels. They go down to the inmost parts. That's another thing I see Christians and truthers And their antagonist, just as well, doing is spreading gossip and making it all about the people and trying to ruin reputations. There are people I've known for online for 5 years who have done nothing but try to divide communities and spread false rumors about people. They themselves might be deluded enough to believe they're true, but if you hear something like that, always ask for documentation or some sort of evidence that the charges are true. Then verses 12 and 13, before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. So again, as Christians, we're called to be humble. That doesn't mean be a punching bag. It just means don't go asking for trouble. Don't think you're all that. And try to remember that the golden rule about treating others the way you wish they would treat you. But especially verse 13, to answer before listening, that is a folly and shame. Too many people do that. They want to spout off about something they haven't heard or about someone they don't know. The Bible calls this foolishness or folly and a shame for people. And that hasn't changed for the body of Christ. And then verse 17, in a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines. Too many people, and especially it seems those who call themselves ex-Christians, who grew up in a marginally or somewhat Christian home, and heard one contrary opinion when they grew up and just jumped ship and never looked back. That is not cross-examination. Cross-examination is when you go back and forth multiple times, as you would want done for you if you found yourself charged of something, and especially in a court of law, as using the example here, you would want the prosecution and the defense to go back and forth multiple times until everybody's satisfied they've heard all that they need to hear to make a sound decision. But people don't do that with the Christian faith. They will just chuck it when some other idea comes along that absolves them of responsibility or makes them the top god in their life so that they don't have to give an account. So this is what is lacking a lot of times. This is just, this is Proverbs. This is about wisdom. Not everything in Proverbs is necessarily for all situations. For example, in America, we have some proverbs or wise sayings, especially known as being from Ben Franklin or so forth, saying, for example, a stitch in time saves 9, and haste makes waste. Are they contradictory proverbs? No, they're for different situations. Sometimes you need to act now while you have the opportunity, and other times being too hasty can bring you to ruin. So you have to have discernment. That's what discernment is. It's not black and white. That's why you need to make a judgment call sometimes, and why Christians especially need to be doing that. Verse 19, a brother wronged is more unyielding than a fortified city. Disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. And this is what one of the results are, the consequences of acting like a fool in one of those cases that I read earlier, where people think they can do that without any consequence because something didn't happen right away. And if it did, they would cry like bullies who play the victim. They start a fight and then cry about the backlash. And so what this is saying is that if you do a foolish thing, you're going to have consequences either now or later, and one of those consequences is that the person won't want to talk to you anymore. I've had to do that with a lot of people where, they've gone so far over the top in their personal attacks or judging before they've heard a matter, etc., that you just have to shut off communication with them. That's how you protect yourself, because you're not obligated to be anybody's punching bag. And once you do that to somebody, getting them to talk to you again is just about impossible, or it should be. That's a matter of principle, I think. If somebody has wronged you to that extent, and make sure they have before you take that last extreme, is, the consequence is that you will turn people away from you forever, probably. And sometimes, like I said, if you're on the victim end of that, then you need to protect yourself from people who continually attack you and tear you down. And this is what a lot of counselors and pastors forget when especially victims of domestic abuse come to them for help and they say, suffer for Christ. Suffering for Christ is to come at the hands of unbelievers who hate you for your faith, not at the hands of spouses or boyfriend, girlfriend, or people in the church. Those are not supposed to abuse. And you have every right to defend yourself and call them out and separate yourself from them if they abuse and they have the habit of abuse. And even if they've done it once, and make sure it's abuse and not just offense, where you're being physically or mentally or spiritually beaten down, you have to separate yourself from people like that. Then verse 24, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. These are kind of parallelisms as well, or contrast. Either one can be the case in Hebrew poetry, which this is a poetic writing, even though it's wisdom literature, that's how they wrote it. And there's two different things, but they're kind of two sides of the coin. Having unreliable friends, and be careful who you choose to trust, is what this is saying. So if you hang around with people who are unreliable and they make excuses all the time and you keep forgiving them and saying, oh yeah, anybody can make a mistake, if this happens habitually, you have an unreliable friend, and if you have those, it says you're going to come to ruin yourself. But on the other hand, there may be people who are even closer than family because they treat you better than family does, and they're people of principle who always have your back, and of course, it's good to be that friend also. Those are the people you really want to hang on to, is look past the personal differences and the personality quirks, and sometimes personalities clash, and try to look for what that person's core values are. And if they're the kind who are loyal to you as a friend and will tell you when there's a problem, or will come to your defense if there's other people around, they don't stop to ask first whether you asked for it. Remember that little passage we read earlier, don't ask for it. And a friend, if you're a friend and you see, like I've used this illustration because of things that have happened to me online, former friends that I had to let go because it's as if they saw me being beaten by a mob on the sidewalk, and instead of pulling me away and beating off the attackers and then finding out what happened, they just assume, oh well, you probably asked for it because you're a Christian. That's not what friends do. And so don't be that person. If someone is your friend, come to their aid first and then take them aside and go, what happened? That's what you do as a friend. Then to Deuteronomy 32, we have what God thinks of some of these people who are habitually bad. He says, their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are filled with poison and their clusters with bitterness. Parallelisms again. Their wine is the venom of serpents, the deadly poison of cobras. Have I not kept this in reserve? This second part, the second stanza, if you will, this is really important. Have I not kept this in reserve and sealed it in my vaults? It is mine to avenge. I will repay. In due time their foot will slip. Their day of disaster is near and their doom rushes upon them. These are the consequences. And they're up to God, not to us. Now, that doesn't mean that as Christians we don't say, catch a robber or put him in jail if he keeps robbing people, or it doesn't mean we don't protect ourselves. It simply means that when it comes to vengeance for wrongs done, the purpose of incarceration is to protect society from dangerous people, but not necessarily to change their soul. They're not really correctional facilities at all. They're punishment places because they have to be kept away from the rest of society. And a lot of times, ironically, in the U.S. at least, they're treated better than the homeless or poor people. Or the middle class, who has to pay for their own food and shelter and clothing and medical care, while people in prison get all those things for free at our expense. But that's another topic. The problem, the point is that when it comes to ultimate justice and things that you won't get necessarily in this life, leave it to God. God will avenge. People will pay. And just because God doesn't do that right now doesn't mean he isn't going to do it. And this is why some people get overconfident and think that they can just go on getting away with murder, because they don't see immediate consequences. So they don't learn lessons. They don't change their behavior. God is just being patient and merciful, but if they don't turn from their wicked ways, then they will be responsible and they will have consequences. And then Matthew 7 is where Jesus said, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? this is all familiar to us, but rarely do we practice it because we're so busy looking at the sin that other person does that we don't care about the sin that we're doing. And that, again, is a self-judgment issue. This is not for the church necessarily to rectify, because this is talking usually about a personal difference here. But if you are going to accuse someone of something because of their character, there's something wrong with their character, make sure that your character is in pretty good shape. Now, we do have, as I always look at the example of 1 Corinthians 5, where the sinning, backward, backslidden, worldly Corinthians, the church there, were ordered to throw a guy out for a sin that was so egregious that the surrounding unbelievers were shocked, and that this was giving the faith a bad name, and they sinners themselves had to throw this guy out. So there's a time and a place to actually do that, when sinners have to take out a habitual unrepentant sinner. But what this is talking about here in this context is personal hypocrisy, or a double standard, where we think someone else's sin is worse than ours. For example, someone lied and got somebody else's, they slandered somebody and ruined their reputation, but we go around stealing things, collecting money for work we didn't do, or something like that. In that case, we do have, I think, that application of what Jesus is saying here. And then that was Matthew 7, 3-5. This is Matthew 12, 49, 50. Pointing to his disciples, Jesus said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Here again is what Jesus is talking about, truth dividing. I think I've got that next. Where it is truth that divides people, even in a family. If you got family, this is what we get the phrase "good old boys," where people will protect their kin even when their kin are rotten criminals. That's not what Christians are called to do. We have to recognize even relatives who are dead set against the faith, not to present ourselves to be punching bags for them, but to call it out and separate if necessary, because God has called us to live in peace, as Paul said in another passage, I think in 1 Corinthians, I don't have up here. But this is what I was talking about. Jesus said in Luke 12:51, "Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on there will be 5 in one family, divided against each other, 3 against 2, 2 against 3, father and son, mother and daughter, daughter-in-law." It cuts right through families. That's what truth does. Jesus came to bring truth. He says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," in John 14:6. And truth will divide, and we shouldn't be surprised if it even divides families. Romans 1:18 to 2:16 is a longer passage, but hopefully you get the idea. He's going to say one thing, and then he's going to turn it on the people who were thinking so highly of themselves as he, wrote down this list of faults. And he says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." In other words, you look at creation, no person did this. Nature can't do anything it isn't programmed to do, designed to do. Therefore, there's a designer, and you get into all the philosophical issues about the cosmological principle and all sorts of things. But the point is, without all that high philosophy, is that this place was created by a power much higher than ourselves. And space aliens doesn't answer the questions, the transpermia theory. All it does is move the goalpost to a place no one can investigate, and that is not an answer, it's an evasion. So, and then verse 21, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, like said philosophers, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles." People made themselves idols. "Therefore," That's the reason these people knew the truth and suppressed it. Therefore, God gave them over. What does that mean? God caused them to be evil? No, he said, okay, you made your choice. I'm going to help you go even farther in that direction. And by doing that, the way he did that is just to let them go and to stop trying to stop them. You know? So God gave them over to the sinful desires of their hearts, sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another, exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. So they, and people do this today. They want to worship or venerate or elevate anything and everything but the Creator. They want to be their. They resent the idea that there is a God whose help we need. And they think that by doing, the opening their third eye and doing chakras and all this nonsense, that they're going to become gods themselves, basically. And this is what they do. They made themselves idols as well. So because of this, again, we have therefore, and then because of this, God gave them over to shameful lust. And then it talks here, just tell me what you think when you read these words. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. By description, there leaves no doubt in anyone's mind as taking this as it's written is as a condemnation of evil behavior, that this is talking about homosexuality and all sorts of other perversions and degrading and all sorts of things like that. There's no way to quibble about words and what might have also gone on in Sodom and Gomorrah. It's right here in Romans 1, verse 26 and 27. And then 28 says, furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over. God decided not to retain knowledge of them, to a depraved mind, so that they do what ought not to be done. They become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They're gossips. Gossips are in this list. So if somebody's spreading gossip, they're no better than these people in the rest of the list. Full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. I mean, that's the list that this is in. And then it goes on. Gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, that is to say, being loyal, no love, no mercy. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these things, but also approve of those who practice them. There are Christians doing this to other Christians today, especially the slander and gossip. And they're no better than any of the rest of these perverts that have just been described in Romans 1. But here's the twist. You, therefore, have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge another, you're condemning yourself because, and it's not just everybody, this is not a blanket get out of judgment free card, because you who pass judgment do the same things. If you're not doing the same things, you're not being talked to right here. What Paul is saying is he's talking mainly about Jews and Gentiles in the whole letter to the Romans. And he's saying that, he's listing all these things the Gentiles do, and the Jews are undoubtedly patting themselves on the back, right? And then he turns it around and says, you have no excuse because you do the same things. It doesn't matter if you're Jews, the chosen people, you will suffer the same condemnation because you do the same thing. So how can you point a finger? Then verse 2, we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere human being, pass judgment on them and yet do the same things, there it is repeated, yet do the same things, do you think you will escape God's judgment? Or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, forbearance, and patience, not realizing that God's kindness is intended to lead you to repentance? God doesn't have immediate backlash because he wants to give you time to repent, so you don't need his discipline. Then verse 5, because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath, when his righteous judgment will be revealed. It's delayed. God will repay each person according to what they have done. And the footnote here is from Psalm 62 and Proverbs 24. Oh, lost my place here. I don't know what happened there. Well, let's try this again. I don't know why it did that when I clicked on the footnote. Anyway, we're in chapter 2. And it says, God will repay each person according to what they have done. To those who by persistence in doing good seek glory, honor, and immortality, he will give eternal life. But those who are self-seeking and who reject the truth and follow evil, there will be wrath and anger. There will be trouble and distress for every human being who does evil, first for the Jew and then for the Gentile, but glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good, first for the Jew and then for the Gentile, for God does not show favoritism. All who sin apart from the law will also perish apart from the law, and all who sin under the law will be judged by the law. There's a lot, people jump to conclusions again, but they got to read it through and read it in context. For it is not those who hear the law who are righteous in God's sight, but it is those who obey the law who will be declared righteous. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature the things required by the law, that's a slam against Calvinism, because Calvinism says you can't by your nature do the things of God, but here it says Gentiles do this. They are a law for themselves even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, and we're talking not about the laws of Moses here, because those aren't the laws written on hearts. How can they be written on Gentiles' hearts when they weren't even written on Jews' hearts? They were written on tablets of stone. Their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing and other times defending them. This will take place on the day when God judges people's secrets through Jesus Christ, as my gospel declares. So there is a delay, and there's a lot of things that people, like I said, a lot of branches you could take off of there that people go to one extreme or the other. But the moral of the story of all these verses that I've been showing today is that hypocrisy is rampant in the truth community, in political community, in the Christian community, because people are abusing each other, making excuses for it, and deciding that it's okay to do what they say you shouldn't do because you did it and they didn't like it, therefore they're going to do it to you, which makes them no better, so don't be that person. Anyway, there's wisdom in the Bible and balance in the Bible if we look for it, and people who think that there won't be any consequences for their behavior are very wrong. Some of them you get now, such as when you so antagonize someone that they don't want to talk to you anymore, which is their right not to do. They have the right not to be abused, and to you don't have the right to force them to listen to you. A lot of people don't get this, that you can't beat the truth into people. All you can do is keep telling, and if they keep plugging their ears, then eventually the door will shut. Even God runs out of patience eventually, and that will be the end of it. So behavior is a big deal in the Bible. The Bible says a lot more about our behavior than it even does about our doctrine, and doctrine is very important. So that's my little rant for today, and even if there's only 2 people here, that I thank you for coming, and I'm going to find out how to stop this any second now.